We'll continue now with difficult conversations 3, the feelings conversations. When we talk about feelings, it's difficult for people. And so oftentimes, although we're objectively saying something else, what's really happening is we're talking about our feelings. So feelings conversations can hide inside more objective complaints. For example, you haven't paid your share of the rent yet. You didn't turn in the report on time. You left the kitchen a mess. Those are all objective complaints, but they may actually be hiding an underlying feeling about something. So for the example we gave in class of the student whose boyfriend was 25 minutes late picking her up, and when she complains, "You're half an hour late," the boyfriend, and again, that looks like an objective, factual complaint, then it's really masking the fear of, "You don't care enough about me, and that's why you made me wait. I'm afraid you don't really love me." The problem is, because it was framed as an objective complaint, then that's where the conversation tends to go in a very frustrating way. Also, because the speaker exaggerated her victimhood, which we all do, then the conversation goes off on a tangent. So now the boyfriend can say, "No, I'm only 25 minutes late. I'm not half an hour late." We all tend to exaggerate when we feel we've been the victim. And just in terms of negotiation, that's a bad idea, because you go off and then you argue about factually what happened, and you lose credibility because you already exaggerated here. Consider how much smarter it would have been to say, "You're 20 minutes late." What's the boyfriend going to say? "No, it's 25. I'm 25 minutes. Of course not." But the bigger problem is you're really masking how you feel behind an objective statement. So these are hard skills, to talk about feelings and to listen to people talk about feelings. We avoid these conversations sometimes because we don't want to jeopardize relationships, but the feelings can bleed out in other ways even if we decide to avoid the conversation. So what do we do with our feelings? We often convert them to judgments. If you really cared about me, you would have done this. You would have come on time. You would have left the rent check. You would have turned this in on time if you cared about me. It's a judgment. Or we make attributions. "He always does stuff like this. He is such a jerk." Characterizations. "You always," or "you never." Whenever sentences start that way, it can't be right in the first place. No one's always or never anything, frankly. So what you're doing is trying to paint them into a whole of someone who's not being fair or reasonable or loving. Or else we decide we're going to solve the problem by telling someone else what they should do. "You should do this and that and the other thing, and therefore I'm done." Problem solving doesn't solve feelings problems, however, necessarily, because the feelings need to be acknowledged and repaired. So just sort of categorically saying this, that, and the other thing should happen, that isn't going to necessarily solve a problem related to feelings. Feelings are based on our perceptions, and our perceptions can change, and therefore our feelings can change. We often avoid talking about feelings, but it can be very powerful. Consider having a very thoughtful and unemotional discussion about emotions. You can have an unemotional discussion about emotions. If you're in the heat of passion, anger, frustration, that's not a good time to do it. Cool off and think about a neutral way to talk about how it feels. Not non-harmful conversations with other people. You need to reduce the cost of others having those conversations with you. We can all think of someone in our lives who we just avoid having conversations with because it's just not worth it. They're going to get upset. They're going to lash out. We won't hear the end of it. This often happens with people who we're going to continue to have relationships with, for example, family members. And we can't just say, well, forget it, I'm not going to deal with that person anymore. And so so instead we often just hide and avoid talking to them at all. You don't want to be that person. I understand that person's probably in your life in some form, where if you just say, I wish, Mom, that you would do this next time, and get your head bit off. But you want to be the person who can hear things without blowing up. So reduce the cost of having other people raise feelings conversations. If somebody raises a feelings conversation, start with curiosity, exploration. Try to avoid getting defensive. Instead of, when someone says, for example, I felt abandoned when you did this, instead of getting defensive, saying, I don't know how you could feel that way. I told you this. That's not a reasonable assumption on your part. Just shut up and hear what that person is saying. You want to make sure that they feel heard. It doesn't mean you agree with them, but feelings aren't something you agree to anyway. People feel how they feel. Feelings aren't right or wrong. Oftentimes, people will say, I'm sorry, I'm upset about this. Please forgive me for being upset. We often engage in ways that we should be apologizing for, but you should sometimes apologize for your behavior. You should never apologize for a feeling. You feel what you feel. Sometimes people will say, should I feel this way? Am I entitled to feel this way? You're missing the point of it. The fact is, you do feel that way. And go ahead and explore what a constructive response to that feeling would be. Consider sometimes if it's worth having the discussion at all. And again, there's sometimes people in your life where it simply isn't worth having the discussion. And that's something for you to think about ahead of time. But if it's worth trying to reach a healthier resolution, start a sentence with, I feel. I feel that you're not taking me seriously when this happens. And how can I understand better what your intentions were? Realize that sometimes feelings are the entire problem, and so you may not even need to make wholesale changes to the way you do something. If the feelings get acknowledged and the underlying misunderstandings cleared, that might solve the problem altogether anyway. Sometimes the entire problem is feelings, and if you try to solve it with something else, it won't be a solution. Think about a child who says, I'm afraid to go to sleep, there's a monster in my closet. Most of us wouldn't respond to the feeling there. We would respond factually. We would go over to the closet, we would turn on the light, we would say, see, there's no monster. Okay, there's no harm in doing that, but responding factually to a feeling isn't going to resolve the feeling. The child feels scared. That's what's really happening. So somehow something has to happen where you're addressing that fear.